Commander Krix Bloodfang adjusted his ceremonial armor, the iridescent scales gleaming under the artificial light of the Grand Diplomatic Chamber. His four-fingered hand traced the countless battle marks etched into his chest plate, each one representing a conquered world or a crushed rebellion. The luxury space station Celestial Accord, orbiting the neutral territory of the Centauri Belt, buzzed with activity as military leaders from across the galaxy gathered for the first intergalactic military conference. Another round of Nebula Whiskey Krix called out to the automated serving droid, his gravelly voice carrying the weight of countless victory speeches. The droid whirred smoothly across the polished floor, its anti-grav units barely making a sound. The premium spirits here cost more than what most beings earned in a standard solar cycle, but such luxuries were fitting for warriors of his caliber. Three younger officers from the Proxima Coalition huddled at a nearby table, stealing glances at his impressive array of medals. Krix pretended not to notice, but his secondary breathing vents flared with pride. The Bloodfang name struck fear across 12 star systems, and his personal battle record stood unmatched in the galactic archives. The thing about real combat, he announced loudly enough for the young officers to hear, is that it requires a certain evolutionary advantage. Not every species is cut out for the art of war. He paused dramatically, letting his retractable claws drum against the crystalline table surface. The sound echoed through the chamber, drawing more attention. A group of Zentarian peacekeepers quickly found reasons to be elsewhere. Their species had good reason to fear him after what happened in the Orion offensive. Krix allowed himself a satisfied growl. The stories of how he'd single-handedly breached their supposedly impenetrable energy shields had become required study at military academies across the galaxy. The serving droid returned with his drink, the dark liquid swirling with bioluminescent particles. Krix lifted the glass, studying the patterns. They reminded him of plasma torpedoes streaking through space, beautiful and deadly. Just like him. Commander Bloodfang, a respectful voice interrupted his musings. A junior diplomatic officer, scales still shiny with youth, stood at attention. The human representatives have arrived. Krix barely contained his snort of derision. Humans, the galaxy's newest upstarts. They'd barely mastered faster than light travel, and already they'd been granted a seat at this prestigious gathering. Probably some political maneuvering by the Peace Council, always eager to appear inclusive. Very well, he rumbled, rising to his full 3-meter height. His armor's power assists hummed to life, helping bear the weight of his countless military decorations. Let's see what these humans think they can teach us about warfare. Little did Commander Krix Bloodfang know, but his legendary smugness was about to face its greatest challenge yet. The humans had brought their own war stories to share, and they were nothing like the sanitized tales of glory he was used to telling. The humans didn't look particularly impressive. Krix observed them from across the chamber, wondering how such soft-skinned creatures had managed to survive long enough to develop space travel. No natural armor, no claws, not even basic poison glands. The two representatives approaching his table appeared almost comically small compared to his towering frame. Commander Bloodfang, the female human said, offering what he recognized as a diplomatic smile. I'm Colonel Maya Rodriguez, retired Earth Defense Force. She gestured to her companion, a weathered-looking male with interesting scars across his face. And this is Lieutenant James Cooper, Special Operations, also retired. Krix performed the customary greeting gesture, careful not to extend his claws. I trust your journey through contested space was uneventful. He couldn't quite keep the condescension from his voice. The humans probably required escorts just to navigate basic stellar territory. Oh, we managed, Cooper said, his tone carrying an edge that Krix couldn't quite interpret. Had a small run-in with some pirates near the Cygnus Cross. Nothing too exciting. The Cygnus Cross. That notorious sector had claimed countless military vessels. Even Krix avoided it when possible. You encountered Cygnus pirates and survived. Survived, Rodriguez laughed, the sound sharp and unexpected. Cooper here convinced them to give us an escort. Said something about introducing them to human negotiation techniques if they didn't comply. Cooper shrugged, pulling out a chair. Amazing what people will agree to when you explain the concept of thermite to them. Wonderful stuff, thermite. Burns through pretty much anything. Krix's secondary heart skipped a beat. These humans spoke of handling Cygnus pirates like it was some amusing anecdote. And what was this thermite? Some kind of psychological warfare tool. Please join me, Krix offered, suddenly curious. I'd love to hear about human military capabilities. I understand you've only recently achieved orbital bombardment technology. Rodriguez signaled the serving droid. Actually, we try not to use orbital bombardment much anymore. Too messy, too many civilian casualties. We prefer more precise methods. Precision. Krix's throat sacs vibrated with amusement. In warfare, the point is to demonstrate overwhelming force, to crush your enemy completely. Cooper leaned forward, his scarred face catching the light. You ever hear about the time a human unit held off an entire mechanized division with nothing but household chemicals and farming equipment? Impossible, Krix scoffed, but something in Cooper's eyes made his scales tighten. Oh, that's nothing, Rodriguez added, accepting a drink from the droid. Wait until you hear about this little conflict we had called World War I. Really showcased human innovation in warfare. One Krix's translator must be malfunctioning. You number your wars. Sure do, Cooper grinned, but there was no warmth in it. Got quite a few of them. Each one more interesting than the last. Krix felt his battle-hardened confidence begin to waver. There was something unsettling about how casually these humans discussed combat. No boasting, no ceremonial language, just matter-of-fact descriptions that somehow felt more threatening than any war cry he'd ever heard. And they hadn't even started sharing their actual war stories yet. The Nebula whiskey flowed freely as more military veterans drifted toward their table. Commander Krix noticed General Vax Thor of the Silicon Armies, their crystalline form catching the light as they approached. Behind them came Admiral Nuzuth, her serpentine body coiled regally on her hover platform. Even the notoriously reclusive Hive Commander BZTK showed up, mandibles clicking with curiosity. Tell them about the Triton campaign, rumbled Admiral Nuzuth to Krix, her scales rippling with excitement. These humans should understand what real warfare looks like. Krix's chest swelled with pride. The Triton campaign was his masterpiece, a symphony of destruction that had earned him his current rank. 3-star systems, he began, watching the humans' faces carefully. 3 heavily fortified star systems with planetary defense grids that were considered unbreachable. How long did it take, Cooper asked, sipping his drink with infuriating casualness. 6 standard months, Krix announced proudly. The fastest conquest in recorded galactic history. Rodriguez raised an eyebrow. 6 months to take 3 systems? Interesting approach. What was your casualty ratio? Minimal. Krix lied smoothly. He'd actually lost 40% of his fleet, but these humans didn't need to know that. My forces were unstoppable. We used revolutionary tactics, striking from multiple vectors simultaneously. Basic encirclement, Cooper muttered into his glass. We figured that out around 1940. The gathered aliens leaned in closer, sensing tension. General Vax Thor's crystalline surface flickered with interest patterns. You cannot compare primitive planetary conflicts to interstellar warfare, Krix said dismissively. The scale alone. Speaking of scale, Rodriguez interrupted. Anyone here familiar with the Battle of Kursk? No. How about Operation Barbarossa? BZTK's antennae twitched. These are human military operations. Just a couple examples from one of our bigger dust-ups, Cooper nodded. Though personally, I'm more impressed by the siege of Leningrad. Now there's a story about determination. Krix felt compelled to regain control of the conversation. During the Triton campaign, I personally led the assault on their capital world. My flagship broke through their orbital defense network, using a technique I developed myself. Really, Rodriguez perked up with what looked like genuine interest. What kind of yields were you working with? Yields? You know, explosive power. Megatons? Kilotons? What was your delivery system? The terms meant nothing to Krix, but he pressed on. We used the most advanced plasma torpedoes in the galaxy. One shot could level a city's defensive shields. Cooper actually laughed. A city? Just the shields? That's cute, he turned to Rodriguez. Should we tell them about what one submarine could do during the Cold War? Maybe later, Rodriguez smiled. Let's hear more about the commander's campaign first. Admiral Nuzuth uncoiled slightly. The Triton campaign is legendary. Commander Bloodfang's forces suffered no major defeats. No major defeats, because I never allow my enemies to survive long enough to mount effective resistance, Krix cut in. Total domination is the only path to victory. Total domination. Cooper's scarred face took on an unsettling expression. You want to hear about total war? Really total war. Something in his tone made Krix's battle-hardened nerve endings tingle with warning. The human's eyes had changed, showing something ancient and cold that made Krix think of stellar cores. Perhaps General Vax Thor's crystalline voice chimed in. The humans would share some of their military history, for comparative purposes. Oh sure, Rodriguez said brightly, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. We've got lots of stories. In fact, we brought some historical footage. Would anyone like to see what happened at a place called Dresden? The gathered aliens murmured in agreement, eager to see what primitive human warfare looked like. Only Krix remained silent, suddenly unsure if he wanted to know. There was something about these humans, something in their casual dismissal of his greatest achievements, that made his combat instincts scream danger. He had no idea that what he was about to learn would fundamentally change how he viewed warfare forever. Rodriguez pulled out a small holoprojector, her movements deliberate and calm. Before we show you Dresden, let me tell you about something we call guerrilla warfare. She paused, noting the confused looks. It's when a smaller, less equipped force decides to make life absolutely miserable for a larger, better equipped army. Impossible, General Vax Thor chimed, their crystalline form vibrating with dismissal. Superior force always prevails. Vietnam, Cooper said quietly. Look it up when you get a chance. Super soldiers with advanced weapons got their asses handed to them by farmers with punji sticks and tunnel networks. Krix's translator struggled with several terms, but the concept seemed absurd. No farming tools could stand against proper military equipment. You'd think so, wouldn't you? Rodriguez smiled. But here's the thing about humans, we get real creative when we're cornered. During my tour in urban pacification, we had this saying, give a human a hardware store and 2 hours, and they'll build you an anti-tank weapon. Admiral Nuzuth's scales rippled with disbelief. You speak of primitive improvisations. Real warfare requires. Let me tell you about psychological warfare, Cooper interrupted, his scarred face now deadly serious. Ever hear of something called the Ghost Army? During one of our wars, we created an entire fake army. Inflatable tanks, sound effects, radio chatter convinced the enemy we had thousands of troops, where we had maybe a few dozen guys putting on a show. BZTK's mandibles clicked rapidly. Deception in warfare is common. We made them so paranoid they started shooting at shadows, Cooper continued, as if the Hive commander hadn't spoken. But that's nothing compared to what we did in electronic warfare. You ever had your entire command and control system tell you it's sunny while your ships are getting fried by a solar storm? Because we figured out how to do that pretty early on. Krix felt his primary stomach churn. These humans spoke of warfare like it was a game of deception rather than honorable combat. Rodriguez leaned forward. Want to hear something really interesting? During one war, we figured out you could turn a ceiling fan, some copper wire, and common household chemicals into a pretty effective signal jammer. The look on the enemy's face when their high-tech communications went dark because of something you'd find in any kitchen. She laughed, but the sound held no humor. But surely Krix tried to regain his composure. Such primitive tactics would fail against proper military doctrine. Proper military doctrine. Cooper's eyes took on that unsettling gleam again. Tell me, Commander, what's your doctrine for dealing with child soldiers? What's the proper military response when civilians start strapping explosives to themselves and walking into your command centers? The gathered aliens fell silent. Even General Vax Thor's crystalline surface dulled with shock. You use children in warfare, Admiral Nuzuth's voice carried horror. We try very hard not to, Rodriguez said softly, her voice suddenly heavy. But it's happened. Everything we're telling you has happened. And worse, much worse. During the Battle of Stalingrad. Cooper continued, his voice taking on an almost hypnotic quality. Humans fought over a single building for longer than your entire Triton campaign. The average life expectancy of a soldier in that building was less than 24 hours. And they kept fighting. Building to building, room to room. Day after day, month after month. Krix felt his combat confidence draining away. Why? Why not simply withdraw and regroup? Because Rodriguez said, her eyes now showing that same ancient coldness as Cooper's, humans don't understand the concept of impossible odds. We look at a no-win scenario and think challenge accepted. There was this one time Cooper added, almost conversationally, when a surrounded unit ran out of ammunition. Know what they did? Started throwing rocks at the enemy, just to show they weren't beaten. The enemy was so unnerved they actually pulled back. Admiral Nuzuth's hover platform drifted slightly away from the table. This is not warfare as we understand it. No, Rodriguez agreed. It's warfare as humans understand it. We've had a lot of practice, too much practice. And now Cooper smiled, but it was a smile that made Krix's warrior heritage scream in protest. We're bringing all that experience to the stars. All those lessons learned, all that innovation born of desperation, all that human ingenuity focused on new frontiers. Krix found himself gripping his ceremonial armor's power controls so hard his claws were leaving marks. These humans didn't just fight wars, they transformed everything around them into weapons, turned disadvantages into advantages, and seemed to thrive in conditions that would break any sane species. Should we show them Dresden now? Rodriguez asked, her finger hovering over the holoprojector. The gathered alien veterans looked at each other nervously. They had come expecting to educate these primitives about real warfare. Instead, they were beginning to suspect they had stumbled onto something terrifying. And judging by the gleam in the humans' eyes, Dresden was just the beginning. The holoprojector hummed to life, casting an eerie blue glow across the gathered faces. Krix watched in growing horror as images of a city appeared, not just burning, but being systematically erased from existence. The very air seemed to be on fire. Dresden was just one city, Rodriguez said quietly. One night. Should we show them Tokyo? Hiroshima? Nagasaki? What kind of weapons are these? General Vax Thor's crystalline form had dulled to an almost opaque gray. Oh, those were just conventional bombs in Dresden, Cooper said, taking another sip of his drink. Now Hiroshima, that was something else. Humanity split the atom just to see what would happen. Turned out it made a pretty big boom. You split atoms. Krix felt his scales beginning to shed, a stress response he hadn't experienced since his first battle, for weapons. That was just the beginning, Rodriguez continued, changing the holographic display. See, we figured out you could make the bombs even bigger. Then we made thousands of them, aimed them at each other, called it mad mutually assured destruction. Admiral Nuzuth's serpentine form had coiled into a defensive position. Your species threatened to destroy itself. Threatened? Cooper laughed. We came close so many times we lost count. But here's the really fun part. We kept fighting other wars while all those nuclear weapons were aimed at each other. Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan. The holoprojector shifted again, showing long ditches carved into mud. Humans in primitive armor were climbing out of these trenches, running into sheets of projectile fire. World War I, Rodriguez narrated. Soldiers lived in these trenches for years. Sometimes they could smell their dead friends decomposing in the mud above them. They called it no man's land, the space between trenches. The ground was so soaked with blood and chemicals that nothing would grow there for decades. Krix's translator glitched, unable to process several terms. But the images spoke clearly enough. This is not warfare. This is madness. Gas attacks were popular for a while, Cooper added casually. Chlorine, mustard gas, phosgene, nasty stuff. Makes your lungs bleed while you're still breathing. So we invented better gas masks, then better gas to get through the masks. The cycle never really ends with humans. BZTK had backed away from the table, mandibles clicking in distress. Your species survived this. Survived it? We took notes, made improvements. Every war taught us something new, Rodriguez said. Did you know you can give someone radiation poisoning with just a small piece of radioactive material in their food? The Soviets figured that one out. Krix's ceremonial armor felt suffocating. His proud battle marks seemed childish now, like a cub playing at war. Stop, he whispered. But we haven't even gotten to the siege warfare yet, Cooper protested with mock disappointment. Wait until you hear about Stalingrad. People ate wallpaper paste to survive. Kept fighting though. Always kept fighting. The holoprojector showed new images, massive metal vehicles crushing everything in their path. Soldiers wearing masks that made them look like death itself. Cities reduced to rubble yet still populated by fighters. The thing about humans, Rodriguez continued, her voice now almost gentle, is that we never really needed super advanced technology to be lethal. We weaponized the environment itself. weather, terrain, even our own dead bodies. Ever hear of biological warfare? That was the breaking point for Krix. His mighty warrior legs buckled, sending him crashing into his seat. The drink in his hand spilled, but he didn't notice. His mind was trapped in the implications of what he'd learned. I led the conquest of 3 star systems, he mumbled, his voice small and lost. That's nice, Cooper patted his arms sympathetically. We nearly destroyed our own planet. Multiple times, on purpose. Then we made trading cards about the bombs and sold them to children. Want to know the scariest part? Rodriguez leaned in close. Everything we've shown you, everything we've described, that's just what we did to ourselves. Imagine what we could do to an actual alien threat. Krix's legendary composure shattered completely. His scales were falling off in sheets now, his proud armor suddenly feeling like a child's costume. The gathered alien veterans watched in shock as the mighty Commander Krix Bloodfang, terror of 12 star systems, began to keen softly in distress. I think, Cooper said, finishing his drink, we might have broken him. Probably for the best, Rodriguez replied. Better he learns about human warfare here than in the field. The holoprojector clicked off, but the images remained burned into Krix's mind. He would never see warfare the same way again. And somewhere in his shattered psyche, a new emotion emerged: gratitude that humans were interested in peaceful diplomatic relations. Because the alternative was unthinkable. The Grand Diplomatic Chamber had fallen eerily quiet. The gathered alien veterans, once proud and boisterous, now huddled in small groups, speaking in whispers. Commander Krix Bloodfang sat motionless, his drink untouched, scales scattered around his feet like fallen honors. Admiral Nuzuth was the first to break the silence. We must propose a formal alliance with Earth immediately, her serpentine form trembling slightly. The strategic advantages. The strategic advantage of not having them as enemies. You mean General Vax Thor's crystalline form pulsed with nervous energy. Did you see the footage? They turned cities to ash as a matter of course. The humans are leaving soon, BZT clicked quietly. Our recommendation to the Hive will be clear: full cooperation with Earth in all military matters. Cooper and Rodriguez stood by the chamber's viewport, watching the gathered alien veterans with something between amusement and regret. They had removed their formal diplomatic attire, somehow looking more dangerous in their simple civilian clothes. Think we overdid it? Cooper asked, scratching one of his scars. Rodriguez shook her head. They needed to understand. Better to shock them here than have them start something they can't finish. Krix finally stirred, his movements slow and careful, like someone recovering from a serious injury. Tell me, he said, his once commanding voice now barely a whisper, does your species feel fear? Of course we do, Rodriguez answered, turning from the viewport. Fear kept us alive. Fear taught us to be creative. Fear showed us just how far we'd go to survive. You split atoms, Krix continued, almost to himself. You poisoned your own atmosphere. You lived in mud trenches with your dead. And you call my Triton campaign impressive. Cooper shrugged. Everyone's got different standards. We just happened to spend a few thousand years figuring out every possible way to kill each other. Turns out that's pretty good practice for interstellar conflict. The news spread quickly through the station. Within hours, 17 different species had submitted formal alliance proposals to the human delegation. Trade agreements, technology exchanges, and military cooperation treaties appeared with unprecedented speed. As the humans prepared to leave, Krix found himself walking them to their ship. His proud warrior's stride was gone, replaced by something more thoughtful, more measured. The thing I don't understand, he said, watching their small vessel power up, is how you stay sane, knowing what your species is capable of. Rodriguez smiled, but this time it held genuine warmth. That's the real secret, Commander. We remember what we're capable of, and we choose to be better, most of the time. But you keep the knowledge, Krix stated. You keep the weapons. We keep them, Cooper nodded, and we hope we never need them again. But if we do... He left the sentence unfinished. He didn't need to complete it. Krix understood now. Standing in the docking bay, watching the human ship depart, Commander Krix Bloodfang made a decision. He would not tell war stories anymore. His battle marks would be covered. His victories would go unmentioned. Because now he understood the difference between warfare and war, between combat and conflict, between fighting and survival. The humans had taught him that his proudest achievements were little more than games compared to the abyss they had glimpsed, and as he turned to leave, shedding the last of his loose scales, Krix whispered a prayer of thanks to whatever cosmic force had made humans choose peace.